Okay, good afternoon for most of our listeners, and good morning to the others. We're here at Law Room, and I'd like to introduce Ashley Schwett, who will introduce us.
Hi everyone, this is Ashley. I am a writer here at CampusClarity, and I also manage a lot of our community engagement efforts. I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We know this topic is one of interest to many folks, and so we're really excited to be talking about it on our webinar about campus climate survey strategies and best practices. I want to introduce our presenters today. So with me here in Walnut Creek, I have Dr. Peter Novak. He is the former vice provost of student life at the University of San Francisco and our early partner in the development of the award-winning Think About It program. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Ashley.
Also joining us remotely from New York is Jessica Ladd, who is the CEO of Sexual Health Innovations and the creator of Callisto, a college sexual assault reporting system that we'll be learning more about today during our webinar. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we're going to make sure that she is able to speak to you in just a minute. So before we get started, I just want to take a moment to give a little bit of context around today's event. So CampusClarity helps over 500 colleges and universities meet Title IX and Campus Safe Act requirements. Over the past 6 months, we've been developing our own climate survey platform to enable institutions to easily build, track, and deploy climate surveys at the campus and system-wide levels. So the impetus of this event today is really for us to start leading more conversations around this topic, to have experts like Peter and Jessica share their experiences, and of course to hear from you, hoping that you're willing to share your experiences and challenges surrounding climate surveys as well. Throughout the webinar today, you are welcome to submit questions with your GoToWebinar sidebar in the questions box, and we will answer them either throughout the time or at the time when we have specific space for questions. I also want to let you know that we have Pax Haymeyer, who is another one of our writers here, live tweeting under the hashtag climate survey. So please feel free to follow us on Twitter as well. And Peter, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. I'm just going to test and see if Jess is online. Can you hear us, Jess?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Everyone else can but us. Okay. So that's going to be an interesting issue. We will, I tell you what, we will try and figure this out as we go, but we will start now by talking about the definitions of climate survey and what that really looks like. So Jess, why don't you talk to us about what a climate survey is and how we define it?
Sure. So a climate survey is really meant to examine the amount of sexual assault on campus, as well as perceptions of campus climate. And it can also include questions around personal attitudes of intervention. And when we're saying the amount of sexual assault on campus, we can mean prevalence or incidence. And by prevalence, we mean of your students on your campus, what percentage of them have experienced sexual assault on campus overall. Whereas incidence means what is the new incidence of sexual assault, so how much has happened in the last year.
Yes.
Or recently.
Thanks. I think what will be helpful is if we also talk about what's required for campus climate surveys. And I'm telling you, that is one of the $64,000 questions, is whether or not the climate survey is required. And our answer is not yet. And when you think about the magnitude of the changes in higher ed has made, climate surveys are, again, an enormous part of what we do. It takes an enormous amount of work, coupled with all the education, all the policies and procedures, and all the support structures that you've got. So I'm going to, and Jess, I'm going to give you a call on your phone so that you can answer it and I can listen to you on my phone, and that way we can solve our technical problem. Let's go through and talk about what potential legislation like Casa looks like.
Great. So the one thing that's moving through Congress right now is the Campus Accountability and Safety Act, or CASA. And it would really require schools to gauge how often sexual assault is occurring on their campuses and to offer confidential advisors for victims. And there's a lot of details that are a bit up in the air. One big question is, of these surveys that CASA would require, how many of these questions would be mandated and the same across campuses versus how much flexibility would institutions have to make their own questions, and how public would the data be. There would likely be some requirement to share survey results with the Department of Education, but it's a little unknown as to whether or not the DOE would create these results publicly in aggregate, or whether or not they would name results with the name of a given institution.
Great. In addition to that, I think we should look at OCR agreements. The Office of Civil Rights doing investigations at many of these institutions that you see here, both public and private, big and small. You can see that they're all different types, have all been required to do climate surveys by the OCR. And so if you look at that, and if you look at pending legislation, you can see where we're going with the requirement of a climate survey. And if you add to it what states are already doing, many of them, as you see here, Maryland, New York, Washington, and Louisiana, already have statutes which require climate surveys, and others are considering it, Massachusetts, for example. You're going to be able to see that, I think it's in the air that climate surveys are going to be required, though not yet. And so the climate on climate surveys is that presidents and institutions around the country are really disagreeing on a government-based, mandatory, government-created climate survey. And what they're looking for is climate surveys that they can tailor to their own institutions, which are much more specific, and that way the government isn't regulating it from their side, which they would probably make an unfunded mandate, but require very specific things. So you can see where we're going with this, that we're going to have to do climate surveys. We should do them, and we're going to talk about why we should do them, as well as the benefits to them and some specifics on how to do them well. So let's move on and talk about some recent climate surveys that have been done. And the AAU has just released, just a couple of weeks ago, their data. And Jess can talk about that more specifically. Jess?
So as you all probably know, the Association of American Universities partnered with WestStat to conduct a campus climate survey at 27 different institutions with over 150,000 students participating. And that's a big number of students, but as a quick caveat, that was only about a 19% response rate. So it's a little hard to interpret data when you have such a low response rate, and we'll be talking about that later. And the purpose of these surveys were really to provide information to inform policies to prevent and respond to sexual assault and misconduct. Now, the findings that were presented really confirmed the widely cited statistic that 1 in 5 women will experience some form of sexual assault while at college. And while there was a bit of variability across institutions, it was pretty high across institutions. And it also found that transgender, genderqueer, and gender nonconforming students are more likely than undergraduate women to experience sexual assault or misconduct across all categories. It was also found that only about 1/4 of students reported feeling very or extremely knowledgeable about where to report sexual assault, which means that about 75% of students were not, and that they lacked that information.
That's a really good point. When you look at the other findings that they've got, more than 75% of sexual assault cases were never reported using official systems of reporting. And that's why we always hear that issues of sexual assault are chronically underreported on our college campuses. And so the AAU survey is validating that significantly. Also, the most common reason for not reporting sexual assault is that students or those who have been assaulted didn't consider it serious enough, with many students also feeling embarrassed or ashamed. And then finally, the one that is also really important for us as administrators is they didn't think anything would be done. And so climate surveys can really help inform the student body that we take the issue seriously. And that's one of the great values, I think, of a climate survey. But over 1/4 of the senior females reported experiencing sexual contact by force or by incapacitation since entering college. And I think that's why we work so hard to combine our sexual assault prevention education issues with also alcohol and drug abuse prevention issues, because we know there's so much connection between incapacitation oftentimes, and even forced sexual assault. So I think this data provides really great information that validates much of the work that's been going on around the country. The other thing that the value of climate surveys is that it really does, as I said before, help to change the perceptions of your campus community, to let people know that you take these things seriously. And that's really important. It also helps to determine who's at risk in your community. All of our schools are different. We all serve very different types of students. And there are a lot of students who might be more at risk than others. There certainly are at our school. And so to help tailor the response and our prevention efforts towards those students. It's to help demonstrate the commitment to improving campus climate. That's vital. That's probably number one in the reason why you want to do a good climate survey. And then to share resources to the community members who may be experiencing distress, to make sure that people know that not only will your report be taken seriously, but that we have a great deal of support structures in place to help you process the experience. And so those are some of the great values of climate surveys that we think are really important. And you know, we're talking today about both climate surveys and Callisto, which are about data collection and really helping you to hone your whole effort towards reducing violence on campus. So when we talk about Callisto a little later, you'll begin to see the differences between the two and how important they are to almost have together. One doesn't supplant the other. So let's talk now specifically about climate surveys and what it is that you want to know. Jess, can you walk us through this?
Sure thing. So one of the first main things that you'd want to know is just rates of sexual violence. When you're trying to judge how are you doing over time, what's happening on your campus, you really want to know how often is sexual violence occurring and how often is it occurring in different communities. Rates of sexual violence can be either sort of that prevalence of among all of your students, how many have experienced it, or that incidence, how many experienced it in the last year. You might also want to know about sexual violence before coming into your campus so that you can better judge what types of resources are needed for your students.
Now,
another factor, oh, go ahead.
Let me just interrupt for a quick second just to say, you know, what's interesting too about that is that Think About It provides a lot of great data and many schools require it before students enter college. And so it's just one more factor in your decision-making process to look at your data, see what students have experienced before they enter college, and then your climate survey can determine what they've experienced while they're in college. Sorry, go ahead, Jess.
You might also want to know about knowledge of policies and resources, and you might not necessarily expect that all of your students are going to know all of your policies and resources all the time, and that's okay. But you might want to get a better sense of where would they go to look for those policies or resources if they did need them, and really just judge their knowledge of the ones that you think that they need to know top of mind all of the time. You also want to understand in what context assaults occurs, right? Sexual violence is a very broad category. How many of assaults are involving alcohol? Of this alcohol, is it voluntarily taken? Is it fed to a student? Do they feel like they are past the ability to consent and that's why it's sexual assault? Or is it rather that they were not entirely sober but not past that line and assault occurred in that scenario? Another thing you might want to know is attitudes about intervention. How are they feeling about different types of interventions around your campus? Either to prevent assault or after assault occurs. Another thing that's really critically important for prevention is understanding potential perpetrator attitudes, understanding what are those upstream attitudes that really might be causing assault happening in the first place, and how do we measure those along with sexual violence itself. Almost last other item you might want to know is knowledge of consent, knowledge of the definition of consent, which could be both on your school and the state level, and what consent does and doesn't look like. The last piece is really reporting rates. Of your students, how many are reporting, maybe a bit of why or why they aren't reporting and who they're reporting to, so that when you're looking at your official reports that come in, you can put those into context and better understand, compared to the ones we're getting, how many might be happening that we're not seeing on a year-to-year basis.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how often do I want to know this information? And really what's important is that you want to show changes to your campus climate over time. And doing a campus climate survey every year would probably lead to survey fatigue among all of the other surveys that we give to our students throughout the year. And remember, it's crucially important not to combine your campus climate survey around sexual assault with anything else. So recommended is probably every 2 to 3 years. Doing something when a student is a freshman and then a senior shows that you've also taken things seriously and allows students to take it twice while they've been in school. And that really lets students know that you've really taken concern to change the climate on campus as well. So that's really important. And then who should be involved? And you all know your campus is best, but really a committee should be comprised of students, social science faculty, which is crucial, social science faculty who know how to distribute surveys and know how surveys work. The reliability of surveys and the way the questions are asked is crucial. Your dean of students, your Title IX coordinator, your people in institutional research, HR, and an IRB member, Institutional Review Board for the Protection of Human Subjects, very important to make sure that they are also included. And then a charge from the president that narrows the scope not to recreate the wheel. In other words, there's so much information out there already on what makes a good climate survey, and we're going to provide you with some of that data soon, information. But, let the president, let everyone know that the president is charging this group and moving it forward so that, again, the campus community can see that the leadership comes directly from the top. That's crucial in any campus community. Then I think we want to look at data and what is it that you're really collecting. Again, you need to have a really sound understanding of how data works and how it functions, and then again how you're going to use it. So Jess is going to walk us through some of the qualifications around data. Jess?
Sure. So when you're trying to first look at your sample and who do you sample as part of your process of collecting these data, you really need to make sure that your survey sample includes all the different communities on campus. It resembles the community of students on the campus, and that it's representative and large. And what large means will depend a bit on the size of your campus. Larger campuses, you can probably get away with a smaller proportion of your students being surveyed versus smaller campuses. And you want to make sure that you're really trying to just be the most useful and driven at the information you need to inform your programming. There are a couple different approaches for surveying. One would be the census approach, which is you send an open invite out to all of your students and you try to offer some sort of incentive for participation. And as much as possible, you want your respondents to match the population on campus. But if you're not getting that through the census approach, you could then do a follow-up survey or instead a more targeted approach to get more information about certain demographics on campus. Another approach would be more of a sample size. So you would try to get a representative or random sample of students that is large enough that you can have some faith in your estimates that you're getting. And when you're calculating your sample size, it'll depend a little bit on how much you want to understand incidence or prevalence or attitudes in certain communities or subpopulations on campus. So if you really want to make sure that you are understanding subpopulations, you may need to oversample those populations, get a larger proportion of them responding to it, or take into account that that's something you care about and take a larger proportion of sample size overall than you might otherwise. There's a lot of great tips on sample size. In the ARC3 guidance, which we'll be talking about later, there's a more full explanation of how you might calculate sample size and tips for thinking about that.
Great. So one of the interesting facets about data too is that in upcoming legislation, pending legislation, Casa would require schools to have an adequate, random, and representative sample size of students to complete their biannual campus surveys. But it's kind of a vague number when you think about that, considering that between 19 and 25% of the students participated in that selection of AAU survey that just went out of many, many institutions. So you really do have to look at the response rate because it's incredibly important to determining the validity of your survey. So Jess, you want to talk a little bit about response rate and why it matters?
Sure. So when you have a very low response rate, either overall to people even starting the survey or you see a lot of drop-off on the course of the survey, it's a little hard to understand how representative your sample is and how much faith you can have in it. So you need to think about response rate from day one and think about how to increase it and what to do if you have a low response rate. How to increase your response rate can include often random sampling. So a random sample and telling a student you are one of a few selected to take this survey will often in and of itself make somebody more likely to take a survey because there's less diffusion of responsibility as opposed to being one of the whole student body. Other ways to increase the response rate include incentives, which could be some sort of monetary incentive, some sort of prize, some sort of recognition. It could also be tied to graduation requirements. One thing to think about, though, with any sort of incentive system is how to be really careful of confidentiality and to make sure that students, when they're getting their sort of reward for responding, aren't in any way outing themselves to what their responses were. So that can be done in a few different ways, such as by giving students a code or a coupon at the end of the survey that they could use, or having sort of a third party helping out with the distribution of surveys. But it is definitely something to take into account. And one thing that will always happen is you will never get a perfect response rate. You will always have some amount of missing data, either because not every student is taking it or because not every student is answering all of the questions. And there are a lot of different methods you can do when accounting for missing data. A lot of statistical techniques such as multiple imputation. But one thing to really think about is understanding what information you need about the people who are or aren't taking your survey or who are dropping off so that you can create meaning into your missing data. And working with faculty who really understand these statistical methods can be really important for analyzing and understanding your results.
Great. Those are all very important considerations when you're looking at the data, your response rate, what you need, and why you need to have not only good incentives, but good confidentiality. And then, of course, really great people who can parse the data out and understand how to fill in the missing gaps of data most completely. One of the other important aspects then is what do you do, well, let Ashley tell you a little bit about a document that we've uploaded for you and some other things first. Go ahead, Ashley.
Hi everyone, it's Ashley here again. Part of my work here at CampusClarity has been really looking at the information that is already out there about campus climate surveys as we go on to develop our own platform. So I've created a document that you can actually download in the handout section of your webinar sidebar. And it's compiled of a lot of information from the government's notalone.gov website, as well as institutions who have already completed their climate surveys and published their data. We wanted to take information from what they learned from their surveys to help folks who have not yet created theirs. So feel free to download that handout. We'll also link to it on our Twitter if you follow the hashtag climate survey or if you follow CampusClarity on Twitter.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Finally, let's talk about publishing your data. What do you do when you get your results, and how do you disseminate that information? The best thing is, again, to have the president or the provost, someone who is one of the highest authority members in the institution, to really publish the data. And then what data is it that you want to publish? How do you structure that? Do you want to give them all the data? Probably not. So there's a great Prevention Innovations has some recommendations that you prepare written reports, and maybe this is what the committee does, or just one or two specific people within the committee, to summarize the study design and the findings. And then reports can also focus on policy and the practice implications behind what the data is telling you. For example, I knew at USF, and this was from data from Think About It, that, as I said, 70% of our students didn't understand where to go to report sexual assault. And that's where you can spell things out and say, look, we're going to put some resources behind this and we're really going to change that so that our students, all of our students, really understand. So those are some really important things to consider when you're then releasing the information and the data. And also whether or not you do it publicly on a website or something else that the general public can see. I think that shows a lot of transparency and really helps campuses create a climate that is safe for everyone. One of the other things that we have for you, I think, is some other resources, and the ARC3 is something that we really need to discuss briefly, and that is the Administrator Researcher Campus Climate Collaborative. It has a free resource available to you all, which is a climate survey. And it will give you ideas for incentives, it will give you ideas for how to disseminate the work, it will give you all the survey questions that they came up with, created by a team of researchers at Georgia State and around the country, actually, who deal with sexual assault and sexual violence. And so the ARC3 is a built-in, ready-to-go sort of survey that you can put through SurveyMonkey or other data collection instruments that you probably already have on your campus. So it would be good to check out the ARC3. I think they're going to get inundated after this, which is great. Tell them where you learned about it, because I think that's important too, so that we can all work together on changing climates on campus. That's what CampusClarity does. And that's why we're committed to helping change for the good. Also, the CampusClarity blog, take a look at it because it's got many of the articles that Ashley has published with all of the links to a variety of different resources. So go there, look at the blog, and check out how she links to all the AAU data and all that information. So it's a very helpful blog that can help synthesize, together with the best practices document, all of the work that you're going to be wanting to do in the next year or so. Okay, let's turn now to another type of data collection. I think this is really important. Jessica Ladd and the folks at Sexual Health Innovations have created a very dynamic sexual assault reporting system. And it's different from what a sexual assault a climate survey does. This, what it allows you to do, is to collect data in a very different way. So I'd like to have Jess talk about her ideas behind creating Callisto and the general format before we start showing you a little bit about what Callisto does. Jess?
Sure. So Callisto is an online sexual assault reporting system for college campuses. And we really aim to help universities in creating a safe campus free from sexual violence and to support the work of Title IX coordinators, administrators, and safety officers who deal with campus sexual assaults, because your job is a very hard one. There's a lot that you have to do, and we want to try to make that easier. And it really works through a few main sections. One is to help students start the process of reporting their assault in a way that feels transparent, easy, and sort of lowers the barrier to entry for them of that reporting process by starting the process by writing it down. Now, what this writing it down piece entails is allowing a student to create a time-stamped record of their assault online. And there's a few purposes for this. The first is really that the process of writing something down can be really cathartic for a student. There can be a lot of healing coming through the process of processing what has happened to you and documenting it. The second is to create this timestamp document for better evidence, so that in the event that a student does decide to report, you all have this timestamped piece of information that you can use to better understand what their experience was. And the last piece is to collect data, so that if students are deciding to start a record of what happened but ultimately don't decide to report it, that you still have some idea of what's happening with these unreported assaults on an ongoing basis. So we really start the process of writing it down with recording when the assault occurred. And
Jess,
Peter,
let me just ask you a quick question. Before we start talking about going into that, can you talk about what trauma-informed questioning is? Because I think that was one of the bases of creating Callisto, and I think it's really important to discuss how much of that you've integrated into the system.
Great. So there's a lot about reporting a sexual assault that is very hard, and it's very re-traumatizing. And that's true whether it's in person or online. It's a hard thing to do, to answer questions and to relive one of the worst moments of life. So what we wanted to do when we were designing Callisto is really take a trauma-informed approach. That involved talking to experts on trauma. That involves getting feedback from over 25 college survivors on the system, and making sure that when we were asking survivors to document their assault, that we were following best practices of the forensic experiential trauma interview. So from everything from the way that we word the questions, the way that we order them, the answer choices we give, how much multiple choice versus free response we do, what types of prompting we do, is all based on this type of data and evidence to make this process as empowering as possible for the student.
Great, thank you. Let's now go look into how that trauma-informed interviewing process really informed the creation of Callisto.
So the order of the questions that we ask are really based on this interview technique. You start with when, where, what, and then who. And as you go in, you get more specific. So you try to build up survivor confidence throughout the process of filling this form with asking the easy questions first. This is often mirrored in survey design by asking demographic question first because they're easy, they're less personal, and it gives sort of users a sense of confidence that they can answer questions, and it builds almost rapport with the system or with the survey. So we first ask how recently it occurred, and one thing that's really important here is, was it within the last 5 days or was it more than 5 days ago? The reason why we ask this is if it was within the last 5 days, we want to encourage survivors automatically to go and seek additional resources such as a forensic exam. So we want to make sure that we're giving that feedback loop. We then ask more specifics about when did it happen. So was it happening this school year? Did it happen when somebody was a student but before the school year or before they were a student? So that when you're trying to interpret through aggregate data, what does this really mean for your campus, the when becomes really important for you to figure out what are things that you can intervene on versus are outside of your control.
Yeah, that's very important, I think, because oftentimes we will get reports of a sexual assault that happened before students arrived at college, and they're either triggered by something that happened and want to, talk about it in some way, or even report it. And I find that, and I think there are statistics, I think you mentioned this, Jess, that students actually often don't report until many months after the original incident. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. On average, it's 11 months before.
11 months. Yeah, that's significant.
So we then next ask about the where. And again, this is important for you all. Was it on campus? Was it off campus? We want to understand whether or not it's away from school or for study abroad. So this can be important for you as well for understanding the context of this assault. And we also, you'll notice on each of these questions, give an option of other, I'm not sure, or I'd rather not say. And this becomes really important. The other, I'm not sure, is important because you want to make sure that as a survivor, they're able to answer every question and they don't have to feel guilty that they don't have an option choice that fits their experience, or if they actually are not sure of exactly where it happened. Or if they'd rather not say. Again, validating that as a choice and making sure that we are reinforcing for survivors that they're able to fill out this form at their own time and it's within their own control to answer or not answer a given question. The next piece we ask about is more of the specifics. So as you can see, we're getting more and more specific as we go through the survey. So we can ask a specific question if they know exactly where it occurred to put in the exact address or location, but we want to reinforce that it's okay if they are unsure of the exact address or location. Again, trying not to make a survivor feel guilty for not having all the information. And we want to encourage them to not guess. So one thing that will often happen, particularly in in-person interviews, is survivors will really, they'll want to convince you that what they're saying is true. And so sometimes they'll guess or they'll give their best guess of what happened. And that can actually hurt them farther down the line because it can lead to conflicting testimony. because they're just not sure. So we want to prompt the survivor for the information that they know, but not prompt them to think of information or try to fill in the gaps when they really don't know. The next bit that we talk about is the what. And this is really to try to help them put what happened into context, as well as help you all understand why they felt it wasn't okay. And right here we have a few different options of different reasons why a sexual act might not be okay. But we actually work with the schools to figure out whether or not there are other categories, other scenarios that they want to understand whether or not those might be occurring. We also want to give the survivor the space, in addition to these multiple choice questions, to add an additional notes. So, for example, a survivor might say, I consented to kissing, but was not okay with other things, because there's often a lot of nuance and complexity that happens in these cases of sexual assault or violence on campus.
Great.
The next question we really ask is about whether drugs or alcohol were involved. And this, you'll see, has a lot of different answer choices. And that's because it's very complicated. It's quite possible that a survivor might not remember the entire incident, that their use of alcohol could be voluntary or not. The same could be true of other drugs, whether or not they felt pressured or forced, and whether or not the perpetrator was in any way using alcohol or drugs. This question was one of the most sensitive to survivors when we asked them about it. So we wanted to make sure that when we're asking it, we're giving them feedback on why it's asked, so that to reinforce that it's not their fault just because they were drinking, and to reinforce that they will not get in trouble with their school for underage drinking or using illegal drugs, because that can often lead to survivors not wanting to disclose all information, which can hurt the case further down the line.
I think this is incredibly valuable, because oftentimes what happens in a situation where a student is being interviewed, and if they're asked were alcohol or drugs involved in a standard interview on campus, they may feel very put off and very much like there's a bias against them for some reason. And so the ability for Callisto to consistently have the info button and say, why are we asking this question, really helps the survivor understand and give more power to them, because this is for their benefit. If they can remember the most information and be able to report it as accurately as possible. And so that's one of the benefits that Callisto has, is that you don't have a person interviewing, and Callisto isn't meant to subvert doing a live interview. That's not what this is about. If you think about, and this is something I've always said, that just the step of going into a dean's office or a Title IX person's office to report something that may have happened to them is a huge step to begin with. And so to be able to learn about and know about your own campus's policies and procedures, and be able to write down for yourself what has actually happened, helps to really empower the student to perhaps come in and then actually report it. And we'll talk about reporting in a minute, and I think Jess will also clarify the relationship between mandatory reporting, what happens on a college campus, and why, and the distinction between what Callisto is and does and what the university's response is. So we'll get to that a little bit at the end. Sorry to interrupt, Jess, but let's keep going with talking about what happened.
Great. Yes. And then when we ask what happened, is this is really the meat of it, right? Is trying to encourage the survivor to take their time, include as much as they can remember about what happened, and to write it down. And to prompt them for what types of information they might want to record, what types of information might be important, and to help to encourage them that they can always come back later and add to this form. So that if they don't want to fill it out all in one sitting, that's okay. If other details come up later on, they can add them in, and to, again, reinforce the feeling of control over this process. And the next piece that we ask is really the who. So this is trying to understand the status of the student at the time of the incident, if they were a student at the time of the incident, their gender, and their campus. And we also want to, maybe even more importantly, want to know the who of the perpetrator in terms of prevention. So whether or not the perpetrator was a student, whether or not the perpetrator was a student on their same campus at another school nearby, and the perpetrator's gender, campus, and if they know it, their name, which would be the next slide.
Great.
And no worries. And just to clarify, the one of the ways that this form works in response to one of the questions that came up is that there is skip logic here. So that if a student is asking a question and they're answering it, say yes, it happened on campus, then we want to make sure that we're asking follow-up questions about where on campus. Whereas if they say no, it was off campus, we're only asking them questions that apply. So we want to be very careful with the logic, and we take a lot of care to make sure that we're only asking students questions that are relevant to their experience.
Having worked with Jess with her development of Callisto, I can tell you that they have thought of every single question and permutation to the complicated, very complicated issues of reporting sexual assault. And I think just going through and having Jess and her staff members go through our university's policies and procedures and our resources and ask us pointed questions helped us clarify our own process and policies and procedures. And it was incredibly invaluable to help synthesize those in a way and create a user-friendly experience like Callisto that helps to answer questions much more succinctly and clearly. And you'll see that as we go through and we start talking about reporting in just a minute. But first, Jess, can you synthesize by talking about aggregate data?
Sure. So we are collecting data on these 4 main categories, and as you saw, that's really important for documenting for the survivor themselves their experience, so that if they do elect to report, they have this document that includes the main types of information that you need to start an investigation. But it also means that we have some really rich data that might be important to you all when you're thinking about your prevention efforts, or when you're thinking about what type of services to offer survivors when assault unfortunately does occur. And that aggregate data falls into these 4 categories of the when, the where, the what, and the who. So the when, for example, would be what time of year do assaults seem to be occurring when they're happening on campus? Is it happening right around spring break? Is it happening right around the big Halloween party? So that you might know when prevention efforts or when additional messaging around consent might be important. The where, is it all happening at your campus center? Is it happening in a given dorm? This might also be important for pinpointing where the problem is and how to prevent it from occurring in the first place.
Great.
The what proportion involve alcohol, and then the who, right, the class year of the people involved, and what those dynamics might look like, as well as the gender.
We have about 10 minutes to go through the rest, and it's important information. And so we'll move to reporting quickly, and of course that's a big consideration. Can you discuss reporting and what the difference is between what you do and when the reports come to the college and how that's all structured?
Great, yes. So besides the recording portion, once a student has created this timestamp document, we want to make it easy for them to report. So they're asked to verify their identity with their school email address. They're asked to provide their preferred contact information for when the entity they're reporting to reaches out to them, and that would include their full name, their preferred phone number, whether or not it's okay to leave a voicemail, and if so, what the message should be. What email address somebody should try to reach them at, which may not be their campus email address that you have on file, and any other notes that we have. And we want to sort of not guarantee that a given staff member would be able to accommodate all these needs, but make sure that in the event of a report coming in electronically, that you have the information you need to try to be sensitive to a student when reaching out to them. And then we ask them to confirm they're consenting students before they report. And one thing that I should have said earlier, but to clarify, is that this is a third-party service. So until this button is pushed, until the student confirms this and sends it in, you cannot see or have any access to anything about their report. And that is very much on purpose. It's very hard legally sometimes for schools to hold on to information and not take action. So by it being third party, it means that the student can keep this available to themselves, keep its time stamped, but it reduces your liability as compared to what it would be if you had this information and weren't acting on it. So that's where we're trying to make the line there.
Great. So
go ahead.
One of the things I want to it's Callisto basically is like a bank of some kind. Can you extend that metaphor for me a little bit?
Sure. So one thing that we do with every report, you'll notice here that a survivor is prompted for their secret key. And what a secret key is almost like a key to a safety deposit box, where their report is in a safety deposit box. Their secret key encrypts all of their data so that we, Callisto, as the bank, can't actually view anything in the safety deposit box because we don't have the key. Only the survivor has the key. This becomes really important for protecting the privacy of survivors. We want to make sure that we can't even view any data that we shouldn't be able to view, and that in the event of the subpoena, a lot of the information in this report we're not able to access, including the narrative of what exactly happened. So that's our way of trying to ensure confidentiality as much as possible to survivors and to be very sensitive towards that.
That's great. And I know that throughout the process, confidentiality and security has been a #1 issue in the development of Callisto, and that you guys have done a really good due diligence to ensure that students' privacy and confidentiality is enhanced. Can you talk about the matching profile? And this is something I think universities will find very interesting, is that it allows you to really look at repeat offenders and find them perhaps more quickly than you might in any other way. And that's a huge asset and resource to institutions. Can you talk about matching a little bit?
Sure. So matching is really designed to help survivors who might not necessarily want to report unless they learn that the person who assaulted them assaulted someone else. So here is student A, who is thinking, I only want to report student X if they assaulted somebody else. And they'll enter into matching their own contact info and student X's identity. And then you have a student B who is thinking the same thing, right? But right now, neither of these students would probably report. But student B also enters in the same information into Callisto. And then a match is found when student B enters their information on student X's identifier. And we'll show you in a second what that identifier is. When that match occurs, the information about student X is sent to the school automatically, along with the contact information for student A and student B, and that form that you just saw filled out as part of the reporting process. And an email notification is sent to both students that explains that a match has been made and gives them the option of sending the rest of their record with this timestamp to their school. So there's a lot going on here. What we're trying to do is really help schools identify when repeat assailants are happening on campus, because when we've been talking to survivors, overwhelmingly, they have said that they would be interested in reporting if they knew that a match had been made, if they knew that somebody else had been assaulted by the same person. And the way that it looks from a user's perspective, if they're opting into matching, is they again have to verify their identity, and they have to be okay with their identity being sent to the school in the event of the match. They fill out that same preferred contact information sheet, and then they're asked for an identifier about their assailant. And this can be, what the identifier is, can be customized to the school. So one thing that is very often easily found by students is the Facebook URL of their perpetrator. If they know who they are, they're often able to find the Facebook URL. But on Pomona College, which is another of our pilot institutions, they're using both Facebook URL and campus email address to add unique identifiers. You could also add other types of social media handles, cell phone numbers, other things that uniquely identify a given student that you think it's very likely that a survivor would know about their perpetrator.
Great. Then can we move on after reporting? And let me just say one thing about reporting, and that is that the institution does not have an official report until the student elects to send them the electronic version of their report. So in terms of mandatory reporting, we may have students who are accessing Callisto and starting to write a report on their own, but have decided not yet to report to the institution. And we don't have any knowledge of that until it's actually sent to the institution. And that's where I think the question of mandatory reporting comes in and that people want to know. But what's great is that we do get some of the aggregate data of how many students are looking at Callisto, how many of them have gone through portions of it, who, what type of characteristics are those people? Is it around a certain date or time, like around a Halloween party or something like that, that it's being accessed more often? So as an institution, we'll have data anyway, even if if students elect not to report to us. And that's really important too. But as we move forward, I think it's really important to look at what their reporting options are. Can you discuss this briefly?
Sure. So we spend a lot of time working with our campuses to ensure that we have content on the site very clearly explaining what different reporting options are. One thing that often happens as there are more and more mandated reporters is students might be less likely to go to in-person services to get information about the reporting options, right, which might even decrease the number of reports that are happening. So by putting this information really clearly online in a format that we created with the input of survivors, we can make sure that the information that survivors really care about is easily accessible to them in a way that is confidential. So in this example, we provide information about reporting to the college through Callisto, reporting to the college if someone else names the same perpetrator through Callisto, reporting to the police, reporting to the college in person, and reporting anonymously if that's an option on your campus.
Great. And then we've got the resources page as well, which I think, and I'll just briefly summarize, is all of the resources that we have on campus and around campus, off campus as well, both nationally, state, citywide, and then the ones on campus. And so all of this information is available to the students as they look through Callisto. And all of these things combined create a much more holistic way for students to access at their own pace what the information is. And I can tell you it was invaluable to have the staff of Callisto walk through our own policies and procedures and to help put them down in a way that were accessible and easily understandable without the sort of policy speak and all those other things that happen as we go through the complicated task of reporting and investigating sexual assaults. Finally, I just want to say the last thing is that the differences between Callisto and climate surveys is really how and when data is used. A campus climate survey really is about, am I improving over time and how is that happening? And Callisto is really more specific information from survivors on how to increase your ability to act. So again, it's students who don't have survey fatigue, it's students who are actually undergoing or have been traumatized by a sexual assault or sexual misconduct and are giving you data that you can act on in the moment and very effectively. The two work very well when they're paired together, I think, rather than thinking of them as separate things. And I just know that Sexual Health Innovations is a nonprofit based in New York with an office in San Francisco. And as a nonprofit, it's done amazing work at really trying to take a complex issue and boil it down to the essentials in a way that really empowers survivors of sexual assault. So thanks, Jess, very much. We have a couple of minutes for questions, or we might not have any time for questions. So I think we answered some of them as we went through. We integrated questions about Title IX, about mandatory reporting. Of course, there are questions from community colleges about how often would they need to do a campus climate survey because they have students for only 2 years, and what might that look like? One of the most exciting things, I think, and I know that Jess will be coming to, or Jess or staff from Callisto will be coming to our conference that's coming up right before the NASPA conference. And so that they'll be able to present a much more detailed overview of Callisto at that conference and show people more of the demo of the product itself. So I think the conference that's coming up pre-NASPA is going to be very exciting. We have a lot of great speakers involved, and I know a lot of you will want to come to that. So I'll turn it back over to Ashley. Jess, thank you so much for all that you've done and for giving us an overview of Callisto. It's really fantastic.
Thanks, Tina and Jess. I really appreciate it. I just want to say really quickly to confirm that we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar as well as the slides and resources that we've been going through. So before you leave us, I just want to introduce George Homer, who's one of our account executives, and he's going to take a few minutes just to make a pretty big announcement on behalf of CampusClarity. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to hand it over to George.
Thanks, Ashley, and thank you again, Peter and Jessica. And so many of you already know me. My name's George Homer. I'm an account executive here at Law Room and CampusClarity. For 7 years, I've helped hundreds of higher education institutions launch their Campus Save Act and Title IX training programs. So over the past 6 months, our product team, led by Eitan Clower and Jeremy Beckman, have been developing a climate survey platform with the simple goal of enabling our clients to easily build, customize, and deploy, as well as track climate surveys at the campus and system-wide level. And so we're currently in the beta release stages of the new platform. We're calling it Campus Climate 2.0. We have 34 institutions currently participating in the early release, and today we hope to add another 10 institutions from this webinar into the beta program, and I'll talk about that more in just a minute. So I'd like to talk through a little bit of the different aspects of the Climate Survey 2.0, and when we look at the product definition, there's, as I mentioned, it's designed to enable institutions of all sizes to easily build, customize, and deploy and track climate surveys at the campus and system-wide levels. And so the platform has 3 primary components. So we have Survey Builder, Student Experience, and Reporting Tools. So let me quickly dive into a feature of each of those. And so the Survey Builder has an intuitive interface that allows you to easily introduce, edit, and manage survey content. And some of the key functionality included in the platform: advanced question customization, skip logic, IRB consent forms, there's email deployment, tracking tools, as well as mass upload functionality and test surveys. Then we get into the survey experience at the student user level, which includes a completely anonymous user tracking protocol. There's customizable logos, responsive design for iPhones, tablets, or other mobile user experience, as well as an intuitive user interface with progress indicators to increase adoption and completion rates. And finally, from a survey reporting standpoint, there's a lot of power in this platform. You, of course, have the capability to download anonymous survey response data into an Excel format, but you're also able to track survey changes and isolate data produced by different questions and survey variations. And so you can measure the survey stats based on drop-off rates, completion rates, and time on page to really help better optimize your survey experience. And perhaps most importantly, you'll be able to cross-tabulate anonymous reports at the campus or system level and run and filter reports for isolated data review. So it's obviously I'm pretty excited about Campus Climate 2.0, and I suspect many of you are as well. And so, as I mentioned, we'll be in beta mode until December 1st. We're going to open the doors for 10 additional institutions to join the 34 that are already signed up and that are willing to participate. And so the upside of the beta program is you're able to get 50% off of your first year. And what we'll ask in return is that your participation includes 3 focus group surveys that we'll be conducting over the next 6 weeks to help tighten the platform before our official release in December. And yes, I see a few people submitting questions. So Campus Climate 2.0 is an integrated add-on to your existing platform. So if you do decide to upgrade to Campus Climate, the platform can be easily accessed within your existing user experience. So no new technology or integrations required. So that's pretty cool. So if you're interested in participating in the beta program, you can type beta into the question or comment box on your sidebar. And so if you also like a demo on the program, and I know many of you have already scheduled that with us, but if you have not, go ahead and type demo into the sidebar. And finally, if you just want to talk or offer feedback or ask questions about what we're doing, you can type feedback along with, and myself along with our product team can find some time to answer any questions and walk through our development of the program. So my contact information is on there on the bottom of the screen. Feel free to contact me directly with questions. And with that, we'll conclude today's webinar. Thanks again to everyone for joining us, and special thanks to Peter and Jessica, and have a great rest of your day.